home, and knowing that people being home might have a little more time, and at that time thinking, well, when the world opens back up in the summertime, right? Because that's what we were thinking in April. Well, hopefully life will be back to normal in, July and August. That at that point people would be ready for their vacations and so forth. So we were really trying to capitalize on teachers, being home and being a little restricted in activities, maybe having some time to put into this process, and as well as having an instructional coordinator who could support the work of these teacher teams. So what we wanted, the idea at that time was really bringing a team of teachers together. So for example, Intro to Automotive. How many teachers were using this around the county? And there were a handful. Holding, the concept that we started with was finding a teacher. And I actually just wanted to pause to say, I want to talk a little bit about our initial concept, and then Kathy, who is here with us, she's, we're going to bounce back and forth and share how we might do things differently as we went through this process. So I'm going to talk about what our initial plan was. So our initial plan was to find a team of teachers.
Also, Lori, just a little housekeeping. If you have any questions for us, go ahead and please put them in the Q&A, and then we'll make some time to address those questions after our discussion. Thank you.
And there's a question now, how do we get a copy of the PowerPoint? I believe this is being recorded, but we will also share that with our CDE partners as well. So at the time, and I think what's really important to note is that we really did learn a lot in this process. I mean, we started early, and we kind of had this group of 4 teachers in the beginning, and then we did another group of teachers over the summer. And what we saw was, we saw a lot of districts just saying, teachers, just put up whatever content you want. And coming at it from the perspective of wanting to have integrity in the curriculum, and also some oversight. This is it's very important to have curriculum that's vetted, that there is a review process for it, just as a textbook that's being adopted in a district needs to go under pretty stringent review. I really felt like it was important to make sure that we had some type of a process, and it wasn't every teacher going rogue with what was happening in their classes. So, there was another element of doing this. It was supporting teachers, creating these courses to support teachers, but also having a process where there was multiple, stakeholders with input on that process, and then having it go through an actual design. And those teachers started by finding teachers who I thought had some background with Canvas, the teachers who were comfortable using the Canvas platform, who knew their content, or somehow, they were a lead, a point of contact for me, and I knew that I felt comfortable that they would be able to do this. And so working with those teachers, and then convening teachers around the county initially with the existing curriculum that exists, that lives in the UCA through G Portal. So it was just really easy to look at that as a starting point, looking at all those units of study, because some of these courses haven't been reviewed in a while. We review them on a rotational basis, confirming with teachers, these are the modules, the units of study, and then taking those and having the one teacher begin to put the content together in a sandbox format, which Kathy was able to access and then begin to design in a formal course. Going back, reviewing with the teacher team, and then having one lead teacher be the point of contact to input that information in the sandbox, the Canvas sandbox course, where then Kathy would access it and then do the course design work, and then push that out into a cloud environment where districts could access that content for their school site. So that was the original concept. And as we did that, it worked really successfully in some ways, but there were some things we learned along the way, and we wanted to highlight some of those things as we talk about it. Kathy, do you want to go ahead and talk about some of the things that kind of actually unfolded and things that we might consider, and as we are looking at putting together the teams and finding the right teachers, setting up the teams and so forth?
Sure. So when you're thinking about finding the right teacher, there's more than just someone who's a content expert, although content expertise is essential. Teachers also need to have a mindset where they're willing to be open to new processes. And they also need to feel comfortable engaging in collaborative work. As we know with career technical ed, most of those courses are heavily hands-on and are used to being taught strictly in face-to-face environments where the teachers work in sharing their expert knowledge in a very direct manner. When we're having to look at moving course content to a virtual environment, teachers need to be open to thinking about how they're going to deliver and engage with the students around the content in a different type of environment than what they're used to. So not to say that being an expert in your field is bad, but sometimes you can get entrenched in certain ways of teaching. And so when you're working with teachers in transformation, you really need to think about, do they have those abilities to be flexible and learning some new methods? So Lori, do you want to talk about setting up the teams and how you picked a lead teacher and how they worked with supporting teachers?
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit. I think that process went pretty well, just having one. And then one thing that was really essential is having, in our case, we had an instructional coordinator who was with us through the end of June, and she or I would sit in on the meetings, but having someone present who is outside the content area, who can help facilitate and make sure that the teacher team is moving forward. And that would happen in any professional development activity, but just to help facilitate the conversation around the curriculum, that's really important. So the team set up, you want to make sure that you reach out to everybody who might be teaching that content. And of course, if it's depending on how broadly used it is, you just at least want to have representatives from all the departments that use the curriculum. But one lead I think is really important. I would imagine in a very large district, maybe you would have two lead teachers, but really making sure you have that opportunity for different teachers to have input. And again, around the state, we're seeing a lot of districts, and I've heard stories from teachers, and I've seen a lot of conversation around just put in content. And again, anytime that we put a textbook up for adoption, it has to go through quite a stringent process. And I think it's really important that we're all mindful of this, because we are responsible for our students' education. And we clearly were in a pandemic. We're doing the best we can, but just to really, be thoughtful and making sure people are working together, and there is some kind of a process there. The course design, I think we can go ahead, and do you want to talk a little bit more about the course design, the next slide, Kathy? Because there's a lot here that we really want to make sure that you cover, and this generally is an area where you would not lean on your teacher to be the expert. This is where you would want to have someone in your technology program or someone who's has some expertise in developing content come in and do that course design element. We're looking for, again, consistency across not only throughout a course, but across an LEA. What is happening in one student's class? You'd want it to have some consistency, ideally, with maybe the science class and the English class, or just to support students. Color coding, is a very basic element. So there's just a lot of stylistic things that help student learning. But Kathy's going to talk about some of these more specific things that she really targets when she gets involved in the design process.
So one of the things that's really important when you're designing for online or virtual learning is to have consistency in the design process. You want consistency within the course itself, as well as it's helpful if you have consistency across your courses. So we had a design model that we used, which followed best practices for online learning. We focused on making sure that we were using modules to structure the learning. And if you're familiar with Canvas, that makes sense. But modules are really just blocks of learning units, so to speak. And it allows you to kind of chunk the material in a consistent way. And then within each module, we always wanted to start with an overview of the content and what the learning expectations were, then presenting the material, but also presenting the material in ways where you embed engagement. So embed activities within the content itself. It's not just put a PDF up and move on. We got to get the students thinking about and engaging with the content. And then having some kind of a wrap up or reflection or a summary of their learning so that it becomes a full circle learning piece. Also using threaded discussion to engage students in the learning, but also engage in the critical thinking process, because that's where you can pose questions, they can dig deeper, they can respond to each other, which also helps build community. And then within that, you want to have consistent design. So the use of similar icons. So if we have an icon for discussion, we want to use that continuously throughout the course. And consistent color. Sometimes people go a little crazy and they use lots of colors, lots of fonts, lots of styles, and that just kind of makes it more wacky than consistent. And then finally, always be aware of accessibility, because you never know how students are going to integrate or engage with the content. There are some very standard accessibility features, like using headers, like a heading 1, 2, and 3 versus changing the font size. There's different ways of using alt tags for images. So there is a standard for creating accessible content. So we had this in place, and this was used in order to evaluate the course content as it was being delivered or developed, excuse me. And this also, having a consistent design model, helped the teachers begin to incorporate that into their content design, so that they may have started off a bit raw, but towards the end, they were making beautifully designed lessons and activities because this was a clear structure and we articulated the need and the reason for each one of those pieces. Lori, do you want to talk a little bit about some of our lessons learned?
Thank you, Kathy. And I just wanted to add that Kathy has a lot of experience. She teaches at Cal State University Channel Islands and works with teachers, training them in use of technology in the classroom. So she's just has so much knowledge, and we're very fortunate to have her helping us do the course design element. I
actually was a distance learning design professional in the late 90s. So that's when I started. I've seen it all.
Yeah, so some of the things that I think are really important to think about, one is ensuring access to content. When teachers are developing content in the cloud, it's really, it's really easy to move around, and you want to make sure that the content that teachers develop, and you might be paying them to develop, is securely in a place that you have access. I think that's really important. Another piece is really having a clear vision and communicating with everyone on these items. And that ties into this next line, hybrid versus online versus face-to-face. You know, it wasn't until we really began to dive into this and the goal really changed midstream, because we started this project assuming we would be in person on small cohorts doing a hybrid model this fall. So when we started this last May, June, we were under the impression that we would be back in the classroom, but maybe the students, you know, would be split into 2 cohort groups, and they would come in and do part of the class in a synchronous in-person environment, and then part of it asynchronous. But then mid-July, everything changed with the governor's orders. So when we had an instructor, a couple of our instructors, they were developing that content with the impression that they would be able to demonstrate certain skill sets and so forth. Again, career technical education, very hands-on. So it's important to like have clarity. I mean, I think now we should just assume everything is fully online. But we had, you know, it goes back to one of the points earlier, like selecting the right teachers. We had teachers who've used Canvas in the past, but they were using Canvas to support their face-to-face instruction. So Canvas supporting your face-to-face instruction is going to, it serves more as a learning management system, more as the, you know, just the entire platform for all of the course content. So I think just really being really clear about that, and in your mind, what, you know, make sure that it's really clear and you clarify those expectations with the instructors, because we were in the middle of doing these projects and we had a couple different groups of teachers involved when this emerged as a challenge for us. And, you know, the nice thing is, as we move forward, we don't know how or when schools are going to reopen, but I'm quite certain that when we think about, you know, the fires we've had, we're in Ventura County, we've had fires in the last few years where we've lost weeks of instruction, Thomas Fire and some of our other fires. We also, you know, we've had these electrical, you know, power days where we have not had power, so school has been canceled, but this is going to be, I believe, the future. We have to ensure that we can deliver the content this way. So, you know, I think bringing together your leaders in your districts and your sites to really identify what it is you want to produce, and having these master courses. But again, the hybrid is going to look slightly different than the completely online and the face-to-face. And those little nuances seemingly are minor, but they do bring up a lot of questions for the teachers involved and in the process of developing those courses. How much content, and really clarifying exactly what all needs to be communicated through that platform. One other thing that we came across just involves CTE specifically. In career education, a lot of our teachers are industry experts, and they've gone through the designated subjects credential programs. And we have amazing teachers, and some of them still don't have the layers of professional development that a teacher who went through a single or multiple subject credential program would have. When we talk about strategies and all the, you know, all the standards and the strategies, even words like pedagogy, some of these things that might be common in your professional development at a district in-service day with your, you know, in an English department, aren't necessarily going to be, you know, common language or knowledge to your automotive teacher. You know, in my case, we have teachers around the county, but we also have an ROP site. So those teachers aren't necessarily hearing those, you know, repeated instructional practices. Or in a traditional comprehensive site, you might think of like 2 strategies a year you're going to really work on. Maybe it's a reading strategy or close reading, or, you know, speaking and listening strategy. It's just not as much a part of that culture, I would say, in general, because it's so rooted in career education. So, instructional practices, we found that that's something that I'm realizing as a site at our county office, as we need to do more professional development just around instructional practices. So that's just something to kind of have on your radar. And then, of course, we all know the challenge of moving hands-on lab experiences to virtual environments. That's really difficult with career education. So just lots of kind of things that we're thinking about. And then one thing that's also come up is as teachers we've developed these master courses. Once they then are implementing these during the year, they can go back in and make little changes and refine on their end as teachers. And when they do that, you want to make sure at the end of the year that you come together again and revisit that. And then maybe you want to update that master course. But that's a process that you probably want to build in. So how can you then take all that teacher feedback and check back on that master content at the end of the school year, so that then you're kind of revisiting, and it's kind of that continuous improvement cycle. But teachers are requesting that, and so that I think is kind of an important consideration that we wanted to be sure that we captured and shared with you today.
And time. It's always going to take twice, if not 3 times, as long as you think it will, to develop the courses. It does take a lot of time, but it's well worth taking the time. If a course gets thrown together quickly, it is going to show in both student experience and learning outcomes. So it does take time, and it's okay to do it in chunks. A few of our courses we're doing in chunks. So the whole course might not be ready right now, but enough of the course is ready to get started, and then we continue down the road to development.
Right. And that is a really important point, the time, because our teachers who are developing these were, of course, understandably feeling overwhelmed doing this on top of their regular teaching. So we have some teachers still doing this now as we started the school year. And, this Canvas is relatively new to me. When I was last in the classroom, I actually was using one-to-one devices, but this was before we had Google Classroom. So I have not taught using Canvas. And so if I'm sure of the participants in this webinar, some of you may not be so familiar. So just a quick explanation. The way that it works is we create the content, and it lives in a virtual cloud, and then the course is created separately. It's like a shell, and then the content gets pulled out of the cloud into the shell. So that shell exists, and you can keep adding to that shell. So for example, we have a digital media class, and the instructor has been doing, and he wants to do some quality content. So we started the year with modules 1 and 2. That's in the cloud, and it's not fully ready, but it is there and available for people who want to pull that into the shell. And that kind of supports that time element, but it's, it is a fair amount to keep track of. I think, there's a lot more to talk about, but I just think I want to emphasize, have a process thought out of how you want to approach it. And again, I just want to underscore that what Kathy said, it's really important to be thoughtful, and we want to make sure our content is accessible for all of our students, for our English learners. We want to make sure that students are engaged, and that's a challenge with that's a whole new challenge in itself. This leads us to this next point, elements to consider. At the start of the pandemic, I happened to be involved in a session, and there was a gentleman there. He's a researcher, and his name is Sunny Magana. And some of you may have heard of Sunny Magana. I wasn't familiar with his work, although I was aware of his name. And he wrote a book called Disruptive Classroom Technologies, a Framework for Innovation in Education. So I promptly ordered the book and read it. And I was a big fan of Marzano for years, and I was constantly trying to figure out how to increase the effect size of learning in my classroom when I was a classroom teacher. And so I was really inspired by this book. And for me, I was ready to go back and teach. I was so excited. But really the premise here, kind of in a nutshell, is that when when we are creating courses in a virtual environment, that we really need to not simply move the course content one-to-one from how it might exist in a classroom to a virtual environment, that we actually need to rethink the outcomes, because using technology in and of itself does not increase the effect size of learning. The tool is only as good as how it's used. So how can we leverage this current environment and this virtual environment to increase the effect size of learning? And what we're seeing right now is that's not happening at all from a lot of our anecdotal reports about students not participating and so forth. But how can we rethink? And just to frame that a little differently, one of the things that I'm involved in here in our career education program is FIRST robotics competitions. This is really big in our county. We have Naval Base Ventura County, Port Hueneme, Point Mugu. I think there's over 40 military commands here, but engineering is really important from a career perspective here for civilian workers with the Department of Defense, along with all the Department of Defense contractors in our region. So from a career education perspective, there's a huge need for people with skills that they learn in robotics programs. So robotics is important to my program. We have a robotics competition every year. This is, it's organized by FIRST, and it usually takes place in late March. So if we are in a virtual environment, now robotics competition, kids come together, they build robots, then they go into these arenas, they have these challenges and they perform tasks. I'm guessing some of you have seen robotics events. But in a virtual environment, I don't know of anybody that's going to try and actually replicate that working from home, virtual teaching from home and distance learning. How in the world will we ever replicate that exact model? We wouldn't really even entertain that idea. What we are doing now is, as I think that there is some conversation about what might that look like. How might we actually leverage technology, achieve some of the same goals? What could we actually do to leveraging technology to do some of these same types of activities? So if I was planning that robotics event, and I'm also involved in an event called Sea Glide, which is an underwater autonomous vehicle competition. There are some other, hackathon is another one. We do some of these events during the year, but it's just going to look different. Our outcomes are not going to be the same. And I just need to dream a little bit. So the point here is, with online classroom environment, with this virtual environment, education as it is now, and probably is taking hold in ways that we are not even imagining will impact us in the years to come. How can we actually leverage technology and rethink the outcomes? And this is a huge thing to consider, because everyone's scrambling right now, and I understand. We're teachers around the country and the world are just trying to be able to provide education. But pie in the sky would really be to reconceptualize what the learning would look like. So you're not just moving, okay, 5 days a week, this is what I did on Monday, this is what I did on Tuesday, this is what I did on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. So I was, my single subject, my primary area was English. What might that English classroom look like? I would definitely shift the learning, shift the outcomes, and make it, maybe more real world. Just a lot of things to really consider. So, but that's a pretty heavy lift. I began to introduce that idea to some of the teacher teams, and that was a heavy lift. It was a little overwhelming. So I don't necessarily wouldn't recommend that, but maybe introduce it and see if you can have anyone jump on board with that. I think that's something to which we should be aspiring. Kathy, do you want to speak to copyright and some of the intellectual property?
Sure. Yeah, and so we put these slides or this particular slide up because these are things that we figured out, right? And so we want to make sure that other folks, if you're starting these programs or whatever, can learn from the things that we had to go through to learn. So one of the things to make sure that you cover in any kind of professional development, course design, discussions with teachers is the idea of copyright. when you're in the classroom and as teachers, we overly rely, I think, on fair use as our catch-all for, we don't have any money, so we're just going to use stuff. But especially when things go online and when you're sharing it out, copyright and following copyright and fair use guidelines is really essential. So it's really helpful to have some tools in your toolkit, such as pointing people to Creative Commons and having teachers understand what Creative Commons is. And if you're not familiar with it, Creative Commons is a group of that has freely shareable materials, images, videos, all kinds of things, or they have materials or images and videos and things like that with very specific, clear guidelines for use. So it's helpful because you're not guessing, oh, is this copyright free? Can I use this? Those kinds of things. So that's really important. The other thing to make sure that you have is very clear established guidelines or rules for intellectual property. When a teacher is teaching in a classroom in a face-to-face environment, a lot of the stuff that is said or done is done generally on the fly. But when a teacher is building content, they may feel that, hey, this is my expertise. I own this. So they could put it together and then walk away with it. But if the teacher is being paid, depending on your rules and regulations, you just want to be clear and upfront about who actually owns the content that's developed and how is that content going to be accessible or not accessible to folks around the county or within your collaborative groups or those kinds of things. So these are some lessons that we learned, and we just wanted to make sure we shared them with you guys so that you don't have to relearn them.
Yeah, so I think those are the key points. If there are any questions or anything, Allison, did you want to jump in and have more conversation or anything in particular you wanted us to go over?
Yeah, so I think it'd be great for the audience to see what some of these courses look like. And I think you were going to pull up some, a visual of that. And so they understand, okay, so it might be, the other thing that came up in a question is if you're not a Canvas user, the courses are still actually accessible. And then maybe let the audience know which courses will be available in OER format and which ones they'll need to contact you to get access to. So I think all of those things would be helpful for the audience.
Okay.
So one of the things that we talked about in our slides, and let me get this over here. Are you guys seeing my the CEC online teacher training?
Yes, it just came up.
Awesome. Okay. So we talked about teacher training, and we were very, very ambitious at the beginning of the summer, and we're starting to put together a teacher training course. And you can see that we brought in the T3 framework. This is Sunny Magana's work. We are going to review setting outcomes and accessibility and designing in English learners and Canvas for both the instructor and the student. And when we got into the introductory module, that was when we had all of our participating teachers ask us what the word pedagogy meant. So we had to take a step back and slow down quite a bit, but we are going to continue to develop this out. And once we have it, we'll be able to extend it over a longer period of time. We were thinking that teachers would go through this in a couple of weeks, and it just that was one of the things we definitely learned off the bat. But then in Canvas, this is just an example of a Canvas that we're putting into Commons. And so we've developed a welcome to Canvas how to for teachers to put into their Canvas courses, or we put them in the Canvas courses, so that every course had a consistent introduction and overview for students so that they knew what to do. And then this is how we see our structuring kind of our modules. There's an overview, there's the different components, discussions, quizzes, interactive components to things. And so you can see that this is what a module structure kind of looks like. So those are the couple of things that we put together in Canvas. One of the things that we can do for those courses that are available for people who don't use Canvas is that the courses can also be exported as a common cartridge formula, which can be generally can be integrated into just about any LMS, so learning management system, LMS, but can also be, it's a zip file, can also be unzipped, and you can take pieces of it and like rebuild in whatever system that you have. It's not quite as, you know, seamless as just taking it from one instance of Canvas to another, but it can be done.
Yeah, and
so I'll have Lori talk about which courses are available.
Yeah, and I wanted to actually circle back, and we were talking about training for teachers, because one thing that emerged pretty early on also, and it's, you know, hindsight is 2020, is what the training will look like for that lead teacher versus the lead teacher who's going to create the content for that Kathy then was finessing, or versus the training that is to be provided for the teachers who are actually just going to pull the content that has already been developed, because those are two different types of really of training. And you know, and it, like early on, it kind of became apparent that the lead teacher doesn't have to do all the design elements. Like, let Kathy is the expert, and we actually have 2 people in our county office who have some expertise in that area. Let them do that work, you know, so that way our teachers can just really focus on providing the industry content, and that, you know, that Kathy doesn't have. So I think that was really important. And then, you know, just engaging students. I think there's so much work to be done in engaging student engagement in just a variety of different ways and all the different tools. And I tried at our back to school, you know, in start of the year meeting. I'm not usually directly involved. I have a principal who's involved with some of our teachers, but just jumping in and showing them some of the basic apps that we can use, and just picking a few strategies that, you know, we are modeling in our meeting formats. You know, some of my teachers had not even figured out breakout rooms, you know, so just introducing them, and we also encourage all teachers, find a few things and develop expertise in those engagement strategies. That is a key point. And I think most everyone has figured that out by now. But, and you know, another thing that we did, and I'm going to circle back to the courses that we have available, is we have our staff handbook. I actually, we put together like 12-page, the first 12 pages of it were about addressing the distance learning environment. You know, there was a page on Zoom, there was a page on like, what does your weekly template of instruction look like with, you know, your synchronous and asynchronous. Just a lot of really clarifying the expectations, because again, last spring we were all just making that mad scramble, but part of the work to be done is having a long-term plan for how to ensure, you know, we can do this in a sustainable manner. So it's not perfect, but it's, you know, we approached it with the plan and we learned along the way. Some of the courses that I think that we have probably near ready, well, or that are in the process, are an Intro to Automotive course, Stagecraft, Manufacturing, Digital Media. I know those for some of the, we haven't, some of our courses, the ROP site, we do, we are not putting out in a shared environment. We do have an Advanced Naval Technology course, but that is a course probably won't be, that's one unit at a time. Does a lot of really advanced work with radar and LiDAR and hypersonics and cybersecurity and some really advanced things. But I think that I'll have to check in with Kathy. I apologize. I don't know the exact status because I'm a little bit, I don't know if we want to put in courses into this Greater Commons area if they're partially built for the year. But I think our manufacturing, stagecraft, automotive, and digital media would be good ones to share out at this point.
And while Kathy's finding that, Lori, there's a couple questions that I'll address. And I see some people raising hands, so just put we can't call on you because it's a webinar format, so please type your question in the Q&A so we can address it. One of the questions is Canvas free? The answer is that yes, you can sign up for a free account. I actually just did that to make sure it's still free, because what we found in the distance learning world is that things were once free and then they decide they're not free anymore. So I'm always checking on that. Many school districts have adopted Canvas for their learning management system. Some are using Google Classroom, others are using Schoology, and so VCOE, the county, I believe, is using Canvas across the county. So that's the learning management, but anybody, or maybe not across, I see Kathy saying going no, but some schools are.
So we have about 5 districts in Ventura County who adopted Canvas. Okay. Other districts are strictly using Google Classroom. For those districts that are part of the partnership, then that are not Canvas users, we're exporting the content out as a Common Course cartridge, and they're having then to manipulate the content to match their own learning management system.
And I've seen a Canvas course translated into Google Classroom, and it communicates very well. So the one that I've seen, and I'm sure they had to tweak it a bit. So there's another question around parent and student training and what that looked like in the beginning phases using Canvas and accessing these courses. Have any of these gone into
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just asked if you guys have actually begun implementation of any of these courses. I know you're kind of building the plane as it flies like we all are.
Yeah. The classes, we got our master scheduling done and things are rolling along. There's embedded student training within the Canvas course itself, but we haven't done any kind of parent training. The idea is that with good course design, a little bit of training on what buttons to push and how to set up notifications, then the students should be focusing on the content and not the tool. So the reason we spent so much time thinking about course design was to minimize the need for extensive tool training. We don't want the students spending time trying to figure out Canvas. We want students to focus on what's going on with applied manufacturing. How am I going to be a vet tech assistant? How am I, what are the essential components of understanding and being a good medical assistant or dental practice? So we don't have a ton of training on the tool itself because we've tried to make it easy through the design process.
Right, and also we are looking at high school students. These courses are designed for high school, and the ones we host at the Career Education Center are grade 11 and 12. It's an ROP site, so we're not designing these for K-8 where parents might be more likely to be involved in supporting students with their homework or their classwork.
So a question came up around how they would access the ones that will be available in Commons, and that's something that if they're not already up and there's not an active link, we can get that out to the field through the listserv, Lori, once that's ready, or put them in the newsletter. I just wanted to let you know that's an option. I've highlighted other open courses from other COEs. In our newsletter this month, we have 4 public courses that will be available in 4 separate sectors, and those are actually in Google Classroom and Canvas Commons. So do you have an idea as to which, well, obviously you know which courses are going to be available, and then how they would be accessible?
Well, I mentioned those.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
so right now, we're, continuing to build and put things together, and we're sharing within a closed consortium within the districts that participate with our programs. The ability, we need to do a little bit more work and have a little bit more discussion on which courses are ready and able to go out to the full Canvas Commons. And I know that we can provide that, but it probably will not be until maybe January at some point. A lot of what we're talking about today is really, if you're starting to go through these processes, here are a lot of the things that you want to consider. And we will be happy to share, but we don't want to share stuff out that isn't good and ready to be used as master courses at this point. I hope that answers kind of what you were thinking about, Lori, too, just in case.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, to just provide a little more context. In the past, prior to this environment, we had a pretty open use of Canvas, and we, in the past year prior to the pandemic hitting, actually, we realized that it was an area that we really felt that needed to be tightened up. So for example, some teachers just had access to setting up Canvas, and so there were a lot of Canvas courses that maybe hadn't been vetted, because when I say vetted, they haven't been reviewed in the way that Kathy is going through and doing that, and they weren't put together by a team, or it was done in a rather loose way. And so we have in our system a lot of courses, and like, let's just say an environmental science course that a teacher in a district put together, but it lived in our Canvas space. And so when the pandemic hit, we had people around the county saying, we need access to this course I taught 3 years ago, and I used it in Canvas in this space. And so what happened is we created this common, hopefully this makes sense, we created a common space where we moved out courses, and we were really clear, we have not vetted these. We are going to leave these to districts to vet. So what lives in our district, in our county, has some like a few unofficial, a good handful of unofficial courses that really haven't been vetted. And that's what we have. But that's what I think everybody needs to be really careful about. That's why, again, I'll go back. That's why we have curriculum reviews. That's why we pilot our textbooks. That's why we adopt textbooks. This is like a whole process. And we just need to all be mindful of that. I just want to keep going back to it, that we have to protect our students. We have to make sure that the content is appropriate, and we have an obligation as administrators, we have an obligation to make sure that that is appropriate content. So what we have now, where we push that out, some of it's unofficial. We told districts, this is on you to go through and vet it all. And we're going through and making sure what Kathy does is appropriate. And, we're really just trying to be mindful of accessibility, English learners, and allowing students to focus on the content rather than struggling through the platform.
Great. So I think before we finish up here, it'd be good for them to kind of see what some of these look like. And I know I interrupted you with some questions and you were about to show that. So is there a way you can kind of show us, I think we talked about the nursing assistant course or one of the courses that you feel is at a place where they can just kind of look and see how it lives in Canvas and what is to come.
I stopped sharing so I could go find the course that we want to share. So
perfect. We get to see Christy's beautiful face.
that up, yeah. So if you want to ask answer any more questions.
Yeah, while you're playing that up, okay, so yes, absolutely. Wow, a lot of them have come in. If we are on the listserv for this webinar, could we assume assume we are part of participating districts. Meaning access. So I think what Lori was talking about is that districts within their county, there will be a series of courses available to the public, as Kathy mentioned, or maybe a few courses would be more accurate, in January. And you can reach out to Lori Arnold specifically if you are interested in seeing their full menu of courses and what is offered in the county, and talking to them about how to access those. So she had mentioned that you can reach out to her, and I think, Lori, we'll put your email in the question and answer. I think everybody sees when we do that. I'm not 100% sure though. How can we get access to some of the courses that may already be created in Canvas? So while VCOE is in the process of finalizing their courses, we wanted to make sure everyone understood how to build courses and some of the things that they encountered as unexpected challenges. And so I think that's the next step will be to make sure that people have access to those courses. Okay, so the newsletter. So we at the, if you're part of, I put it in an answered question up above, but if you are not subscribed to I don't know, can somebody like put in the Q&A if you can see my responses when I type them to the public? That would be great, because I don't know what you guys all see. So we have a newsletter that comes out of the division at the California Department of Education. That is the division I work in, which is the Career and College Transition Division. And every Friday, the last Friday of every month, that newsletter is pushed out. And so I will go ahead and drop again into the response how to get that newsletter. And you have to oh, it did not let me do that. Interesting. I couldn't copy and paste. So you have to subscribe to our listserv to get that newsletter. And so I'll put the subscription as a response here shortly. And then it's on to you, Kathy. I'll try and deal with this now.
Okay, just getting back. So this is just an example that's in the process. So, so you can see this is a shell where we're creating a master course for digital media. So we have, the overview, introductions, different components to the course itself. And then if we go into modules, we have our standard, welcome to Canvas. This is for student, how students can use Canvas, etc. And then you can see that in our module structure, we have, our overview, our different learning content, and our activities. These different icons indicate different types of things. So this is material, this is an assignment, this is a discussion, and you can build out the materials this way. So you can see again, we have an introduction, we have engagement strategies, and we have per module. So when this becomes ready, or when students are engaged in this module, they'll be able to come in, click on modules, see modules here, and depending on what gets turned on, this is part of Canvas itself. With what's the eye with the line through it means that students don't see that particular section. If you notice that there's tons of different things that you can show or not show in Canvas, so the more the less you show, the less confusing it is for students, because they would see tons of things. Now, I'm not sure how much of this is published, but if I come in as a student, notice that all I have is my home button, my modules page, and I can check my grades, right? So students know that they need to come into the modules page, and they come in and they can see the individual modules. They can collapse these modules. And a teacher can publish or unpublish modules, or they can set an opening and closing date if they want to manage things that way. But this is how the course is structured. If we come in and we look at the overview, you'll notice that it's very structured in terms of using icons, using images to indicate certain things. And as students then navigate through the course, each thing is structured and laid out in a particular manner. We also like to use images in order to help build also view, the way it looks. So it's not just straight on text. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave that. So hopefully that gave you an idea of what the different modules are like and how these master courses are developed. Once the master course is at a stage, what we can do is then import them into Commons so that they can be shared. If it's a course that we're sharing out with other districts, then we can put those into Commons, and Commons is part of what Canvas uses as a collaborative workspace. So if we come out to Commons, we'll see a bunch of, and this, my internet is not super fast here, so it'll spin for a bit, but we have, if we look here, we've got, sorry, our filter, we have got a consortium, sorry, this is not, there we go. We've got a consortium for our ROP Ventura County Collaborative. So anybody can go in there who is part of the collaborative and see the courses that we have out there for vetting, and or that have either been vetted, or it'll say unofficial somewhere in the particular course itself. So we have master version 1, and we'll have some unofficial if people click on those. So these are the things that we're starting to put out there for our consortium.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we're actually at time. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Sorry you couldn't see the presenters. You just saw the slide deck and our lovely ASL interpreter. That was my fault. I now know I need to spotlight everybody who's speaking when I'm running a webinar. I also didn't hit record until after our introductions. So I apologize for those of you that will be looking at the recording. Lori's going to be mid-sentence. So we'll probably add some captioning in the beginning to try and get that rectified.
Yeah, so I noticed Kathy had posted, let's see, can we share out that Google link? Is that okay for the PowerPoint? Is that the best way to do that, Kathy? To put it in the Q&A box for everyone?
Yeah, I don't have a way to post to the Q&A.
Oh, I can
only answer questions. So.
And it's disabled for me to copy the sharing. So actually, let me try this again. I can't copy the sharing. I got it. Okay, I'm responding to Cynthia Gleason with the link to the slide deck. And this is actually a great way to do this because we have not put it through the CDE channels to be able to send out and have it all 508. But since this is a partner presentation, it's great that we're able to share it on Google Slides. So thank you for having that and being willing to share that, Kathy. And Lori, do you want to drop your email in just in case people want to contact you to access some of the other courses that are, that are part of this?
Both of our emails are at the end of the slide presentation.
Perfect. And actually, since I dropped that slide deck in the chat, that is your confirmation that you attended today for those of you who needed to verify for your districts. So have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again for joining us.